Good afternoon to you. Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com here. It's Tuesday, August the 15th now, just about halfway through the month of August, and on today's update, several areas that we need to monitor over the next several days. Got a couple of very interesting tweets to show you as well, maybe three when all is said and done, as we march towards the climatological peak of the hurricane season. That ramp up, it's coming. In just a few days, we really start to increase in terms of the odds based on climatology, the chances that we start getting development in the Atlantic Basin. Lots of areas to watch. We're also going to talk about, or I will to you, we'll discuss together, right? At least I'll bring it up and then you can comment on it later and think about things. But we're going to talk about the Eastern Pacific and a very strong and large hurricane that looks to develop there that could bring indirectly a lot of moisture to the desert southwest of the United States and maybe even a good chunk of the west, sort of the Great Basin region. I'll just have to show you on a map. All right, that's what maps are good for, among other things. So let's get started. National Hurricane Center homepage, a couple of areas out here. Not really sure what's going to happen. This is kind of a complex setup out here. We do have these fairly robust tropical waves coming off, but the energy is so spread out and elongated through this region. I'll show you on the satellite animation from a moment from Tropical Tidbits. Boy, you can tell I got a lot to show you today because, again, the tongue and the mouth and the brain are just not lining up. We'll get there. But yes, a lot to go over here, a lot of complex things happening as we get ready to transition into what is likely going to be a more busy period in the days and weeks and maybe a couple months ahead. Meanwhile, in the Eastern Pacific, here is Hurricane Fernanda starting to weaken now as it does encounter cooler water. And then we've got this new area over here back to 90E, EP90. You see it right over there on the right-hand side. I can't take my mouse off and show you or it'll disappear. But they call these invest areas in the East Pac just like they do in the Atlantic. And the numbers go 90 through 99 for these invest areas, and we used them all up. I guess Greg was 99, and now we're back to 90 with this system. So 90E we call it for short, and that looks like it's going to go on to develop and head up well off the coast of Mexico. But it's going to be a very large system. And then yet another disturbance might try to develop. It's hard to say. The model's not quite as enthusiastic about it, and that's going to start to be at the end of, it looks like, this cycle, which will be relevant in one of the tweets I'm going to show you in just a moment. First of all, the satellite animation here of the Atlantic Basin and parts of the Eastern Pacific. There's that large system we're going to be watching in the East Pac that should develop and move up this way, and it's going to bring with it a tremendous amount of moisture for the desert southwest and elsewhere. Got some energy over here tangled up in and around Central America. A little bit more in the way of convection or shower and thunderstorm activity overall. It's starting to increase little by little, especially over here. And remember that when I get to this tweet that I'm going to show you in just a few minutes. But also very prevalent is the African dust. You can see it outlined there. And the dry air associated with it. You can see that dry air literally because of the lack of cloud cover all through here. Very, very dry mid-level air, so it's kind of like a cap. You think about when storm chasers are out over the plains and they say they've got a cap. That's warm air over warm air. Very simple way to put it anyway. You need cold air over warm air, and instability can result from that if other things in the atmosphere cooperate. But out here, it's just not favorable right now and not likely to change very much over the next week to 10 days. But as we get towards the latter part of August, things could start to change. Now, one thing that I have said many times over my career, and especially in the age of doing these videos, whatever doesn't develop out in the eastern and central Atlantic, that energy does make its way westward. I mean, look at Dora. Dora did exactly that. It came off of Africa and made its way all the way across the Atlantic, came close. It got a high probability of development at one point as 95L, and then it just never could finish, so to speak. So it moved across, got into the Pacific, and we all know what happened afterwards. It was a long-lived system, tropical cyclone. So if they don't develop out in here, these tropical waves, they do end up somewhere over here. and then we have to deal with them one way or another, whether it's in the western part of the Atlantic Basin or in the eastern Pacific. Just something to keep in mind. All right, so it might be hostile and not a lot happening out here, but hey, and we don't want to leave our friends out in the islands, but so many of us live over here. This is where it really, really matters in terms of the biggest impacts overall. Again, not discounting what can happen to our friends down here in the islands. We know that. I'm just saying a vast majority of the population areas are in the western part of the basin. Nobody lives out here, so if there are no hurricanes here or there are hurricanes there, that would be only of interest to shipping and even aviation interests as they have to fly over those systems. But anyway, let's get on with it and show you this interesting tweet from Jeff Berardelli here. Yes, the African dust, very prevalent right now, and it does reign supreme, as he says in the tweet. But just as the non-proverbial bell rings on the 20th, magically, or not so magically, I like that, the dust will settle and the Atlantic hurricane season will awaken from its slumber. And this is so very important. It's consistent with climatology. That's exactly what we would expect to happen. These dust outbreaks are fairly common. They've actually been lower than average so far this season, and that has helped, one of the reasons why we've seen such warm water temperatures through here. But lately, a pretty robust plume of dust and Saharan air layer all intermixed, yes, but that looks like it will abate. And then that gets us into this very important tweet here from everybody's good friend on the internet. We know him because of his site and his stellar work, Dr. Levi Cowan. An important tweet. So I'm going to drop me out because I want to make sure we focus on Dr. Cowan and what he has said here. Several people tagging me on Twitter. I appreciate that. And yes, I'm always going to call it Twitter. Check back 10 years from now and I'll still be calling it Twitter. Anyway, Levi, Dr. Cowan says the back half of August will be the first test of the theory that a warm Atlantic can lead to periods of significant tropical activity despite El Nino. A shift of large-scale convection, green in the first image, we'll look at these in just a moment in more detail, these images, into the western hemisphere favors the eastern Pacific first, and of course we're seeing that now, but will result in a more favorable backdrop for tropical waves marching westward from Africa. Low-level western anomalies, orange in the second image. Again, we'll look at these images bigger in just a moment. I'll expand them. That will extend through the Caribbean. Rather uncommon. I'm going to highlight that one. Rather uncommon during El Nino. There you go. Setting up a belt of cyclonic background vorticity. Fancy way of saying the background state will be more favorable to get things to spin up across the tropical Atlantic. At this time of year, when the climatological background is becoming its most favorable for tropical development, the next 2 weeks could see multiple attempts at tropical cyclone formation, and future tweets from Dr. Cowan will focus on them individually. So this is that rising motion. He has annotated it here with the purple circle. This is from the EPS, the Ensemble Prediction System, off of his own site there, the Tropical Tidbit site. All this green is your rising motion, and this is the forecast 10 days out. You understand? So this is a snapshot in time, and look how it all spills into the Atlantic here. None of this red sinking stuff. That's rising motion that gives the upper levels of the atmosphere a better shot at handling or allowing, fostering is a better word, these systems to develop. It will help to reduce the SAL, the Saharan air layer. That dust will abate that Jeff Berardelli talked about. And then at the lower levels, and this is very, very important, these are your 5,000 foot winds, 850 millibars, and that zonal flow there helps to create that vorticity against the background. These waves are coming along this way, and there's just enough of an opposing force that you get a little bit of spin down there. You got to have that extra kick. All these ingredients coming together here over the next several days, and it really is interesting that it seems to roughly coincide by just a few days with that August 20th time frame. Typically, August 20th is thought of Dr. Bill Gray. The late, great Dr. Bill Gray would ring a bell on August 20th. I'm sure you'll see Dr. Phil Klotzbach post that picture again on Twitter on August 20th in memory of his great friend, Dr. Gray. And it's not that August 20th, everything just comes to life and it's just instant hurricanes, but that is truly the beginning climatologically of that ramp up, and there's a reason behind it. And then this year, it is our belief, those of us that have been really following this over the last several months, that the very favorable background state of the record warm Atlantic sea surface temperatures should allow things to take off in a hurry and formidably after that. We don't know for sure. Of course, it's probabilistic, but that's the expectation going forward. And then we add to this, I said in the headline, several areas to monitor. So we've got this interesting tweet here from Eric Webb. Although there are multiple areas to watch, hence our headline today, for tropical cyclone development in the Atlantic the next few weeks, the most immediate concern for U.S. interests is likely this little mid-level trough sitting down here that's going to make its way over to the Gulf of Mexico. We've got this stalled front coming in. That helps with convergence, making the air pile up, so forth and so on. And the upper level pattern is also pretty favorable for development overall. Looks like a nice upper level area of anticyclonic flow develops, as you can see here. I love the annotations that Eric has done. There's your dual outflow channels. So the upper pattern, and this is from the EPS, the Ensemble Prediction System from the Euro. So it's not a singular model. It's not an operational. It's not a one-off. And it's very important to understand, instead of trying to look at an operational model like the GFS, the Euro, or the Canadian singularly, you look and see the overall pattern. Does the pattern even suggest that there could be something to develop? Ian was seen in the pattern before Ian ever even happened. I remember that Eric actually posted a tweet about that several days before Ian came along last year, that the upper level pattern screams major hurricane for the Gulf of Mexico, and that is exactly what happened. Now, he is not saying that here, and neither am I, but looking at that pattern, that's what you would expect to see when you would have a very significant tropical cyclone develop. So, it's not like we have a negative setup and the models that are showing development are just clueless. The pattern seems to be there. So we call that pattern recognition. And, it's like forensics. You're looking for clues, and there you go. Remember that show? If you got kids old enough, or you're old enough yourself, or young enough, I guess, Blue's Clues, right? Seriously. We're looking for these clues, and there they are. And then finally, this massive ridge that's going to develop here over the nation's midsection. Underneath it, typically, that's what we see. It helps to produce the convergence south of these ridges, and we could get some development in the Gulf. I know it's not showing up robustly in the computer models right now, but it could in several days, and we're going to have a short period of time to be ready, whatever happens. And it could bring a lot of rain to areas that haven't had much rain, and so the flooding potential maybe for parts of Texas, northern Mexico, could be substantial. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. It's just something that is showing up, and we need to be watching for it. So let's just scroll this out to the next week or so, and we can see what happens here. First of all, look out in the eastern Atlantic. There's your area of all this energy that's coming off of Africa, and it's sort of its own worst enemy. We're not having any one singular area close off. There's just too much going on out there. So then not really much happens, you see clearly. So over the next week, no, we don't see much development probably out in the main development region. We're just not ready yet. But remember, these impulses, they keep on moving, and then they get over here where the air in the mid-levels and so forth is much more moist and ready to go, and we might have problems later on. Just something to keep in mind. So again, looking at this over the next week, not a lot of activity in the eastern Atlantic. We're just not quite there yet. But let's go back to this tweet here. It's later in the month. This is valid the 25th of August that the EPS sees a more favorable setup in the Atlantic Basin overall. So it's not really a surprise. This takes us out in a week, to August 22nd. So we still have a few days after that the Euro and its ensembles, or the EPS, suggesting a more favorable environment stretching out all across the Atlantic basin here. Not quite there, but it's getting there, apparently. Now, anything that does get going in the Gulf, of course, has very warm water temperatures to work with, more in the northern parts of the Gulf up here, which I don't think this feature that Eric's talking about would affect that area. It's going to be more Texas coast, maybe northern Mexico, it does appear. That being said, water temperatures are still plenty warm along any potential route that a feature could take. And let me remind you very, very seriously here, do not focus on, well, nothing showing any kind of a hurricane, this is all overdone, a lot of talk of all this is hype or whatever. You got to think impacts, and even a disturbance coming in with those kinds of water temperatures could have precipitable water values of extreme, high rates. In other words, the water in the atmosphere could be wrung out in tremendous fashion, and rain and water is a hazard. And I just think just look back to Harvey 6 years ago as a reminder of that. So don't think of this as, if there's no hurricane, I'm not concerned. That is the backwards way to think about this. You need to think about something could be coming. It could potentially dump a lot of rain. What's that going to do for me? I often say that weather is where you can be selfish, and this is one of those situations. What could this mean for me? And we got to just wait and see what happens. It's early, but again, look, we get this amazing set of tools where we could see something potentially happening more than a week out. Well, that's pretty cool, I think, and we just have to use it to our advantage. So, let's see, I think I skipped over, let's go back to this because I do want to zoom in to the Western Atlantic extent, and so we can at least see what the model might be seeing here in the 12Z run. So if we take this out to the 20th or so, not much there overall, right? You don't see it much. But let's go back to the vorticity signature. Now we can see it better as we scoot this out through time. There's the energy right there. It doesn't look like much. Granted, that's it. I don't know, you're like, that's it? Yes, but that is 174 hours out. It could be completely different where we have something much more potent than what this shows at 174. Just don't underestimate how fast things can change in the Gulf of Mexico. We've seen it before, so we do have precedents to go on. All right, we're not just making this stuff up for the sake of it. We learn from the past, look at what happened in the past with pattern recognition, and apply it to what we might be seeing in the future. Speaking of the future, here is the Eastern Pacific. Look at all that moisture down there, even in the Caribbean. There is Fernanda, by the way. But let's watch this system here, 90E. It goes on to develop. There it is right there. And it wraps up pretty substantially. Pretty powerful hurricane eventually off the coast of the Baja. But look what happens on the eastern side of it. A combination of this monster high sitting over here, the clockwise flow around that, and then there is some upper level energy over here, and then the hurricane down here. Yeah, a lot of moisture heading for the desert southwest, northwest Mexico, and maybe even beyond, the traditional areas that the monsoon impacts. Look at all that moisture up there. And if we scooch over and just look at the southwest, here is California, Southern Cal right there, and there's Arizona just to get your bearings, and there's Nevada. Las Vegas will be sitting in here. So let's see what happens. Scoot this out. Look at that moisture come up. The deep greens really start to come in next weekend. Wow, that's really impressive. Really impressive there. So potentially, with all that low-level moisture, fairly low-level moisture, or deep level, that's what I should say, and it's just streaming in over a large area too, right up through the Great Basin. This could be a big flooding issue. You think about Death Valley sitting over here. They've had some serious flooding in recent years, not this year, but the last couple with the monsoon. I think the park got shut down for a time, roads washed out. Western parts of Arizona over here, the Vegas Valley, southwest Utah, you got St. George and Snow Canyon up there, the Virgin River Gorge, hikers all through here. I mean, yeah, heat notwithstanding, this could be a big deal. and I'm actually looking at it pretty closely, conversing with a few of my colleagues out west, one of which, you know him as Weather Overlord. That's Jeremy Smith. To the rest of you out there, he's down in Sierra Vista. He works for the Army, and he's a meteorologist and just a weather geek, solid. I mean, he really is, and a big monsoon fan, so forth and so on. And we've been talking about this. This could be a big problem because it's been pretty dry. The monsoon hasn't been too robust this year, and that's a lot of influx of moisture all at once. Problematic in the short term because it could create flooding, but the benefit later, Lake Mead is rising, and stuff like this can help in the long term. But anyway, it is something I got my eyes on, and if the thing in the Gulf does not manifest itself, or I have time to do both, because this is the 20th, the Gulf feature is like, the 22nd, something like that. Whew! It's like tempting Mother Nature. You know what I'm getting at? I might want to go to the southwest and document this potential flood threat, and then make sure I can get to the Texas coast in time. Something very similar happened in 2020. I went out just mainly for something to do. You remember 2020. I took a couple of my kids with me, my teenagers, and we went out to Arizona for a few days. There had been some bad wildfires out there, and I was documenting some of the aftermath of that. A very weak monsoon signal while I was there, but then Hurricane Hannah popped up, and I missed it because I was in Arizona and I couldn't get back in time, and I don't want to repeat that, but we'll see. So I'll keep you updated on all of that and more, of course, as we go forward, and we'll see what happens. That tweet there from Dr. Cowan, I'm sure a lot of people are going to be passing that around the campfire as time goes on, and we'll see. These next 2 weeks, I think, will be very revealing as to where we go from here. Hey, look, as always, thanks for tuning in. I do appreciate you giving me part of your day. I am Mark Sudduth here at Hurricane Track. That's us. A whole bunch of us helped to bring this to you. We all appreciate your time and attention. I'll be back with more for you tomorrow.